In episode 30 of Bullet Heaven HD, we took a look at Treasure and D3 Publishers' Bangai-O HD Missile Fury on Xbox Live Arcade, and, well, let's be honest, that game was a bit of a f***ing asshole with its ultra-hardcore difficulty and vertical learning curve. Thankfully, if you have a Dreamcast, you also have the means of playing a Bangai-O that's much better suited to, well, actual people.
Bakuretsu Muteki Bangai-O would see release in Japan in December 1999 as an altered, updated version to the Nintendo 64 original, which was released 2 months prior. A US release by Conspiracy and Crave Entertainment in October 2000 and a European release in March 2001 would follow, making the Dreamcast version available worldwide.
Now, Bangai-O has always had a bit of a hard-ass reputation, and while the Dreamcast version is the easiest one, it's still plenty hard with some very forward-thinking gameplay. So let's take a closer look. There are several gameplay mechanics that Bangai-O sports that are actually well ahead of their time. In particular, multiple control setups allow players to control the titular mecha about the screen, all while launching an offensive barrage in different ways that suits them best. By default, shots are fired in the direction that Bangai-O is traveling in. Making fast turns to hit the foes around Bangai-O works moderately well, but given the arena-based nature of the stages as we saw in episode 30, this might not be especially optimal.
This is where the ABXY control scheme comes into play. The Dreamcast controller may only have one analog stick, but its face buttons do a remarkably good job of mimicking a dual stick setup, much like the classic arcade game Robotron. It works really well too. Shots can be fired in a direction independent of your movement with this control setup. In both cases, movement is 8-way and double tapping in the direction you want to go will make Bangai-O dash.
Bangai-O has two different fire modes depending on who is in control. Riki fires more powerful homing missiles which work well in wide open areas, and Mami fires semi-homing reflective lasers that track enemies after their initial reflection, perfect for narrow corridors. These fire modes can be switched by pulling the L trigger at any time, allowing for on-the-fly adaptation to any situation that may arise. But just shooting standard ordnance about the screen is not going to be enough in some cases.
Pulling the R trigger holds Bangai-O in place, and when released, will unleash a huge burst of either missile or laser fire, depending on who's in control. But it goes further than this. Depending on how dense, close, or powerful the enemy fire, the more shots will be fired in response, up to a maximum of 400 at once. You can wreak some serious havoc with this technique, and careful timing can send the explosion counter at the top of the screen way up, resulting in extra item drops. A burst gauge fills with the explosion counter to a maximum stock of 5, but care should still be taken to not use them all in hairy situations.
Despite this, you will likely find yourself unable to avoid all of the enemy fire you'll contend with, but that's okay. Bangai-O has a life gauge that will absorb a fair amount of shots before it's destroyed. This life gauge can be replenished with blue or gold health pickups. Blue ones will recover your gauge by a small amount for each one, and gold ones all the way. With a high enough explosion counter, additional health and even invincibility can also be found. There are even health pickup generators in some levels.
All of these pointers should allow most players to see the game through to the end of its hefty 44 stages. The point of these stages are mostly the same, basically reach the boss of the stage and take them out. But there are a huge variety of enemies, many bosses with different attack patterns and strategies, fast stage layouts, and difficulties as you go through. There will definitely be times where even great players might be hung up on a single stage trying to figure out the best tactic to use for guaranteed victory.
Many of the stages have a variety of barriers and obstacles that must also be overcome. Some are destructible, others not. Some explode with varying intensity, some allow only certain types of fire through but keep you or your enemies from crossing over, and so forth. In a lot of ways, it's very puzzle-oriented, but because of all these factors, Bangai-O is the kind of game that really gives its players a sense of accomplishment once all of the stages are cleared, and there's so much to do here, Bangai-O has some serious natural staying power as a result. But there's more, thanks to its take on scoring. 44 stages sure is a lot of game to work through, but Bangai-O's scoring is taken one stage at a time, which is great for those that like to be competitive, but also like to keep things brief. Working on a single stage's score is a lot faster than perfecting a huge stage set after all.
Pretty much everything that doesn't look like a wall, ceiling, or floor can be blasted away in Bangai-O, with the obvious exception of specific blocks and barriers. Houses, offices, cars, bridges, telephone poles, tanuki statues, shrines, you name it. The general populace will scream while you do it, but in the name of points, it's all good, and you'll get them in varying amounts with everything destroyed.
But the main hook to the scoring here is the giant space fruit that will appear when your explosion counter goes up to certain amounts. Starting at 50-point space oranges and going all the way up to space melons, players can obtain up to 10,000 points per fruit dropped if they can muster a huge enough attack at just the right time with a lot of crap blowing up around them. Just be sure to pick them up before they fade and disappear.
Each stage also has a stage end tally that displays the stage's score and explosion counter, to which an explosion bonus is applied, adding to the final tally. Again, each stage has its own score, so some serious time can be put into getting as high a count as possible throughout the 44 stages in Bangai-O.
Alright, buckle up. This is some crazy stuff right here. Bangai-O has an awful lot of charm in some unexpected places, so let's see what's up.
On the surface and at a glance, Bangai-O doesn't look especially impressive visually. The sprites here are relatively tiny compared to the N64 original, and the foreground elements are typically very simple. However, this allows for a lot to happen on screen, given the Dreamcast's enhanced power compared to the N64. Of course, firing 400 lasers or missiles at once will slow the game right to a crawl, but it actually feels supremely satisfying when it happens.
The backgrounds, on the other hand, are really quite well designed and presented, despite often having a lattice work of metal girders in front of them. Some have animated elements, some have sweet intergalactic vistas, but all work rather well.
The music in Bangai-O is what you'd expect from Treasure, with a great selection of tracks from Norio Hanzawa among others. It's always completely fitting and adds just the right kind of Treasure flavor to the mix in all the right ways.
The sound design in Bangai-O is equally eclectic and as off-the-wall crazy as you'd expect from a game about an intergalactic gang that smuggles skyscraper-sized fruit around the universe. Panicked cries of despair will erupt from the populace as their homes and places of employment are leveled in the name of great justice. Bosses will shriek with hilarious voice samples, and all of the laser fire, missiles, and enemy guns sound just as you'd expect from a game with heavy anime influence. Oh yeah, and the game laughs at you every time it kills you.
But then there's the dialogue. Holy crap, is this ever some legendary off-the-wall banter. Try making sense of what's being said and it'll only hurt more, but in the best ways. It's completely fourth wall destroying at the best of times, and if you're careful, there's even a bit of story progression with some interesting twists and turns. There's even a character that communicates only through pictures.
Throughout the dialogue sequences, there are also a number of character portraits that depict the emotion behind these bizarre phrases that the characters throw at each other. There's also a lot of imagination behind the character design as a whole, and it really works quite well. The craziness goes even further with one of the most bizarre continue screens we've yet seen in a video game.
This game was insane way back in 2000, and it has only gotten better with age. But how does it stack up? Let's take a look.
Both control setups work well, but Bangai-O's faux twin stick setup is awesome.
All of the controls are nice and responsive too.
The Bangai-O series as a whole is really friggin' hard, but this entry is by far the easiest.
There's all kinds of room for players to improve their skill without getting too frustrated.
44 stages is a huge amount of gameplay, to be sure.
Bangai-O has all kinds of replay value for players that want to better their score stage by stage as well.
The visuals in Bangai-O are somewhat simple and a little lackluster on the whole, but everything works really well regardless.
The character design and portraits work really well.
The soundtrack in Bangai-O is classic Treasure with all kinds of great selections.
The hilarious sound effects add to the quirky Treasure atmosphere.
Bangai-O's huge amount of stages, twin-stick style controls, and stage-by-stage approach to scoring make for a great shooter that truly deserved the sequels it would get later down the line.
Bangai-O laid a great foundation upon which the wicked hard Bangai-O Spirits and Missile Fury would build on in the future.
This was a game that we were eager to play even before its release, especially when the N64 original was never brought to North America. With a ton of gameplay and simple puzzle-esque mechanics, Bangai-O is a Dreamcast shooting game that deserves a spot on your shelf. Bangai-O gets a 4.5 out of 5. Getting a copy of Bangai-O on Dreamcast is fairly easy but also slightly pricey. Copies typically sell for around about $50 or so across all territories. Of course, with 44 stages and quite a decent difficulty, Bangai-O could be a game that's worth the asking price no matter where you are. And as off the wall crazy as blah 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 blah.